This episode is sponsored by Bark Technologies, a monitoring resource for parents who are looking to protect their children from online harms. I'm so grateful that parents of today have resources like Bark to keep our kids safer online. And keep an eye out for the new Bark Watch, which is launching anytime. Now on to my interview with attorney Mike Neff. So, welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today I am joined by Mike Neff, founding partner at Neff Injury Law. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you for having me, Nikki. I appreciate it.
Of course. Tell me about your firm. Tell me about you and what got you involved in supporting parents who've been through online harms. And then we'll get into more of those stories in a little bit.
Well, I have been practicing law for 30 years, and I've been doing a number of significant cases. Many of the cases that I get come to me from other lawyers. I got this case, Snapchat, initially when I got a call from my friend Todd Henningsen, who's another attorney in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And he called me up and said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about a case. I represent a man who was hit by a driver at a high rate of speed, and he has significant brain damage. And our understanding is the driver was using Snapchat at the time of the wreck." And I said, "You want to sue Snapchat for putting the speed filter out there?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Yeah, I think that's interesting." And I went home and was talking to family about it, and the feedback was, it's kind of terrifying to think that a family could be driving down the road and get wiped out because someone is driving irresponsibly in order to show off on social media.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of just validated what my gut was and Todd's gut on this case. And, off we went. We filed suit in 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And we got thrown out twice and had to go to the Court of Appeals in the Georgia Supreme Court, get the case reinstated. And here we are 8 years later, still seeking justice for the Maynard family.
Okay. So I reached out to you after I interviewed Meg Stumer, whose daughter was involved in a deadly car accident that was instigated by Snapchat's speed filter. And at the time, I didn't know about it, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing, that for many years, Snapchat had a filter that encouraged children to go fast. I don't know how else they would go fast other than to drive fast and post videos of their speeds, and even giving them a virtual trophy when they got to 100 miles per hour. And that's when I was looking into it and read about your case. Why was your case thrown out 2 times? Can you explain that?
Yes. Well, so when the internet was created, well, not created, but when it became a young commercial entity, the government was concerned that internet companies could get sued for comments made by other people on their website. So like when the internet started back in the late 20th century, you had dial-up accounts, you had bulletin boards, and you had America Online. So it was a very different world than the one that we live in today. And back then, President Clinton signed some legislation that was designed to help protect these young internet companies from getting sued if someone else put something disparaging on their website, like so-and-so's a liar, right? And so that was Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act. And what happened is the law is pretty old-fashioned, and it takes a long time sometimes for the law to recognize new things, and it takes a while sometimes to recognize that the new things aren't very different than the old things. They're just in a different format. That's what happened the first time. And it also happened to us in the Lemon case that we filed against Snapchat in federal court in California. It also was thrown out based on the Telecommunications Decency Act, Section 230. The Ninth Circuit, and that's the federal appellate bench in California, and that covers California and Washington and territories out west. They found that Snapchat had a duty that was not immunized by the Telecommunications Decency Act.
Great.
And I have to give a shout out to my co-counsel, Naveen Ramachandrappa. He does the appellate work at a big firm out here. and did a great job in both cases of getting both cases revived. The second time that we got thrown out was over the issue of whether or not Snapchat could have a duty to be responsible if people were using the app in a way that was not intended. And initially the answer was no. But then if the misuse is foreseeable, then a product's liability kind of analysis is something that should be considered.
Mhm.
So we are back in court in Georgia on Maynard versus Snapchat. The
Wow.
Lemon case actually resolved last year. Yeah, it has been a long journey, as some of the cases that we work on tend to be.
What did Snapchat intend users to use this functionality for when they rolled it out?
Well, you'd have to ask Snapchat that question, and I think that they would answer it very differently than many parents that view it for the first time.
Mhm.
So I'm not in a position to answer for what Snapchat would say they would do.
Sure.
The depositions that we're taking in this case, Snapchat claims are confidential, and
Mhm.
the judge is going to have to rule on whether or not their testimony is confidential until we get to court.
When that day comes, I would love to talk again because to me, this is an obvious function of that design feature or of that functionality would be to use it to drive fast, therefore putting yourself and others in harm's way. So any parent that is listening is going to assume the same. And thank you for describing what Section 230's initial purpose was in protecting the companies, the tech companies, from what is said on their platforms, which made sense at the time, being that they were just message boards or bulletin boards, and they didn't have an influence on what was said or who says it or who sees it.
Right.
But can you describe why you feel that now the tech companies should have some liability in what people are served on social media platforms?
Well, that's a question that's a little bit different than the cases that I'm currently working on. But
Mm-hmm.
just to have an opinion as a parent,
Sure.
I would say the good news about technology is that it's come a long way.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also part of the challenge about the law adapting and recognizing and ruling on the technology. The technology today is such that, with artificial intelligence and things like that, that the companies can actually monitor what's said. Facebook can monitor what's said. Whereas back in 1990, people kind of just threw up their hands and say, how could we police this?
Right.
This is like the wild, wild west.
Yeah.
But if you talk to companies or you read articles in mainstream media, you know, there are companies that are saying we are taking down what we think is false news. We are taking down comments that we think are predatory. We are removing revenge porn and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so what's different today than what used to be, and why companies today should get treated differently, is that society has changed with the tech, and society is saying we're having a lot of problems that we didn't have before we had social media.
Mm-hmm.
And there are lawsuits dealing with depression and bullying and human trafficking and drug sales. I'm not in that wheelhouse.
Yeah. Okay.
But I have spoken to a lot of lawyers because a lot of the issues are in the same neighborhood.
Yeah.
So I have a sense of what's going on and a sense of, what they would argue on the other side. But from my perspective as a father, there are far less excuses than there used to be. And when a company or a party decides that they're going to do something, when they assume a responsibility, then they have an obligation to meet that responsibility in a non-negligent way, which
Yeah.
means if we're going to start taking down content, then we need to be reasonable in how we go about searching for that content and how we go about taking down that content. And it seems to me from what I've read that a number of companies are now agreeing that they have to do something.
Hmm. They are. I would say that in response, they have started to roll out some safety precautions and features. I don't feel they're good enough because we know these companies aren't going to do anything that is going to hinder their profit margins and their stock price. And so we have to look at these updates with a grain of salt and know that the headline could sound great, but we need to make sure we're reading the fine print and just knowing generally that, again, they're not going to do anything that affects the stock price. And back to Snapchat specifically, is this the only feature that Snapchat has rolled out to children that you feel to be harmful? Have you done any work kind of reviewing other features that may cause harm on Snapchat?
Well, I haven't litigated other issues,
Okay.
but I'm aware of concerns about the location tracking services, and
Snap
I
map.
understand that that was initially rolled out so that friends could find out where their friends are. But as things have evolved,
Mm-hmm.
from what I've read, it's been alleged that bad people have also tracked innocent people,
Mm-hmm.
and harmed them as a result of knowing where they are. And that is certainly a concern as a parent, that there is a possibility that people are out there tracking children, for a variety of unhealthy reasons.
Agree. And that is the Snap Map geolocator within Snapchat that parents, if your kids are on Snapchat, go in there and turn that off. Your child can just turn it back on because parents don't have great options for parental controls, but try to keep that turned off because they can be sharing their location publicly, and anyone in their area, a drug dealer or predator, can very easily find them down to seeing the external view of the building that they're in. So that's scary. So the Maynard versus Snap case, what's your end goal here? What do you hope is going to happen for the Maynard family and for the justice around what happened to them?
Well, that is a good question. When we took Mr. Maynard's case, he was dealing with the effects of serious brain damage, and so was his wife, and how
Mm-hmm.
that impacted their marriage and their life and their plans.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still having a tremendous impact. I mean, he walks with a walker, sometimes in a wheelchair. So that family's life has been radically changed as a result of the wreck. What justice ultimately looks like
Mm-hmm.
may very well come down to what a jury thinks of our case, versus Snap's case.
Mm-hmm.
And, a jury will ultimately be the arbiter of what justice would be.
Okay. I know that Snap Inc. does not like bad PR, and this is not doesn't this doesn't look good for them. So did they ever try to settle? I don't know if you can share that.
Right. Normally, settlement negotiations are confidential.
Okay.
The fact that we're still litigating kind of tells you that there's been no meeting of the minds on where the two people are viewing the cases, and it hasn't really been a close a close thing. We're still looking forward to finishing up our discovery on November 1st.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to be deposing Evan Spiegel, the CEO of Snap, and we look forward to asking him questions about his knowledge of the company and the speed filter and the reasons why it existed and those types of issues. So that's going to be a significant day, I think, in our journey towards justice.
Will that questioning be made public?
I think that is a wait and see
Okay.
also. I think
Okay.
there are people that are definitely going to be interested in that, and anticipate that Snap is not going to want that to be public. But in the event that it goes to trial,
Mm-hmm.
it will be. Whether that's probably a 2025 issue.
Okay.
But the good news, I think, from a legal perspective, from a representing the Maynard family perspective, is we're going to get the opportunity to talk to Snap's, co-founder and CEO,
Yeah.
and ask him some questions that have been on my mind for a long time.
Yeah, we all have questions for him.
From my perspective, this case does deal with an issue of public safety, and it does deal with issues that affect all of us. I mean, although Snapchat has taken down the speed filter, which took them until 2021, took them 8 years until they chose to take it down. These issues of what social media companies will do and the choices that they make
Mhm.
and what they prioritize. I've been litigating against corporations for a long time, and I frequently hear that safety is a top priority and this and that. Well, I mean, it really does come down to if safety is a top priority, what were you thinking when you made this choice? And what were you prioritizing when you made that choice?
Mhm.
And, what happens in the next 8 years when you didn't make this choice?
Mhm.
So these issues that are present in Maynard versus Snap,
Mhm.
I think they're present in a lot of corporate cases where people are hurt.
Do you think the tides are changing? Do you think that judges are starting to see clearly that Section 230 does not apply? For example, in the Nyla Anderson versus TikTok case in Pennsylvania, or the Neville versus Snap case with Judge Riff here in California, do you think that the tides are changing and we can see some justice for families regarding online harms based off of functionality and decisions on behalf of the tech companies?
That's a really great question, and I've spent a lot of time litigating Uber cases where sexual assault is alleged,
Mhm.
and that, like Snapchat and products liability allegations, has won a number of those cases. But recently, in August, there were three prominent decisions against Uber. And I,
Mhm.
I think what we're seeing from a plaintiff's perspective is that courts initially really didn't know what to do with technology cases. And now they're settling down and saying, oh, well, you know, this this may be a different type of product, but the issues are very similar, to pre-existing cases. So we're going to apply these principles. And yeah, I think, when we started suing Snapchat in 2016, as far as I know, we were the first law firm to file suit against a social media company. And,
Mhm. Wow.
it was obviously an uphill battle, but thanks to the diligence of lawyers on the team like Naveen, being persistent,
Mhm.
going back to the appellate well, over and over, and the patience of the family to kind of stay with the fight. Because I'll talk to you for a minute about the Lemon family and the Morby family.
Please.
They lost their sons in a wreck in Wisconsin, and we decided to do something different and file it in federal court in California. I'll tell you that the day that Snap finally took down the speed filter was a meaningful win, legal victory, even, though we didn't make a dollar on that one. Those families felt a tremendous relief that other families would not know the pain that they suffered. Um, I think for them, it was like their sons had died, but because of the lawsuit, because of the media attention, because of litigation risk and things like that, Snapchat took down the speed filter, and that was going to keep other people safe, and that somewhat validated their fight and affirmed their fight and brought meaning, positive, like closure meaning,
Mhm.
to a terrible tragedy.
Mike, I often interview parents who've lost children, whether it's to a fentanyl pill that they thought
Yeah,
was prescription that they bought on Snapchat, or
yeah.
are being sextorted on Instagram and they take their life, or they try a choking challenge that they get fed on TikTok.
Hmm.
These parents are literally the heroes of our generation. They retell the worst thing that ever happened to them over and over. So not to get their own kids back, not even to make money off of the lawsuits, just to save other children. And that's why they do what they do. And it's making a difference, I believe, regarding the attention on these lawsuits and some of the wins and us moving in the right direction, but also in getting some attention to important federal legislation to force these companies to be safer. Are you following along with any of the federal legislation that is being proposed? Are you a fan of it? What do you feel about that?
One of the organizations that I'm a member of is the American Association for Justice, and
Yeah.
they do a phenomenal job lobbying for open court systems and allowing people to pursue the fights like the ones that you talked about, because that attention does change the world sometimes. And, in terms of parents being heroes,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, over my career, I've talked to a lot of parents in bad situations,
Mm-hmm.
and they have just said, I don't want this to happen to another family.
Yeah.
So it is the only thing maybe universal in the world, is that a parent could understand
Mm-hmm.
the pain that another parent might have. And regardless of whether you vote with an R or a D or an I or an L, we should do stuff to keep other people's kids safe. We should create some priorities that are meaningful. And teenagers, we all were teenagers once, but teenagers don't have fully developed brains. I mean, they don't assess risk the same way that grown people do.
Mm-hmm.
Their brains are maturing, especially for men, until their late 20s.
Right.
And so they are susceptible to doing things that that you and I just wouldn't do. Like, we're like, it's crazy. There's no need for me to do that.
Right.
And, unfortunately, that's why you need laws sometimes, because you need to protect people from situations where they're maybe not ready to take care of themselves or protect themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important part of the process. I'm not a lobbyist, but I know some, and they work on good causes and they work on bad causes, just like you have good teachers and good doctors and bad teachers and bad doctors and good lawyers and bad lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
The process is the process, but when you're dealing with a parent and a child and loss, gosh, I mean, I don't know anything that's easier to convey, because it's wired into us as humans.
Yeah. And you're right on about where these teenagers are at. And unfortunately, well, expectedly, kids are going to make mistakes. Teenagers are going to make mistakes. They shouldn't die from their mistakes. And
I made a lot, and I look back with gratitude that there was not like smartphones when I was 18 and 22 and 25, because in a sense, the TikTok videos and the pressure to go viral, and I think it does influence these kids to do things that we don't need kids to be influenced to do. I mean,
no.
let's not do that. But the world is a different place, and how do we react to it, and how do we legislate it, and how do we govern it, and how do we find justice in it?
Yeah, and instead of kids coming on social media and feeling this sense of security, everything is cartoony, and there's emojis, and everything's with trophies, and it's just a false sense of security. And instead, we need children to engage online knowing that it's unsafe and that they have to always second guess everything and everyone that they come across. And so it's a whole societal shift. And unfortunately, what I've learned in this work is that the tech companies aren't going to do it on their own. They're not going to prioritize the safety of children over their bottom line. And so we have to legislate against it, and we have to encourage families to take legal action. And I know that after speaking to a lot of families who are doing this and how, as you mentioned, it takes a long time. It is horrible. It's hard, dredging that up over and over. I know a lot of the parents in the Neville versus Snap case with the fentanyl issue, they're going to have to sit in court and listen to these Snapchat attorneys tell them that their kids were drug addicts, pick apart their dead children. And this is not what we need to be focusing on. We need to be focusing their resources on making their platforms safer and not trying to negate what actually happened to these children, right? Pausing here to talk about tools that can help you protect your children from online harms, and that is the Bark phone, the Bark app, and the soon-to-be available Bark Watch. Bark goes way beyond screen time monitoring. They use advanced AI to scan text messages, social media, images, videos, and even audio for threats like drug content and cyberbullying, even child sexual abuse material and harmful challenges. Giving our kids access to technology and social media can be worrisome, but tools like Bark can give you peace of mind. The Bark phone is the most customizable kids phone with text and social media monitoring built in. It is the safest option. If you're going with an Android or an iPhone, please consider layering on the Bark app. It's high-tech parental monitoring that scans their activities for harmful content, allows you to create screen time schedules, block certain websites, and a ton more. And you can learn more about the Bark Watch, which is coming soon, through the link in my episode notes. Back to my conversation with attorney Mike Neff.
It is interesting. So I've always done plaintiff's work. I've always represented the people that have been injured, and I haven't represented corporations in terms of defending them. So I am usually pretty good at guessing what they'll say, but I'm still frequently surprised at the arguments they make and the positions that they take and the things they deny. So I guess if it were easy and simple, then maybe I wouldn't have a job and the world would be a better place. But we work in the world as we find it, and we try and do what we can to make it a better place. And, I do hope that parents, will be aware of the hazards so they can talk to their children about it. My kids don't have Snapchat. They get to tell their friends why they don't. Doesn't mean they don't use social media, but they know from what we do at our firm that this is serious. I mean, people die, people get seriously injured, and their lives are changed forever. So we gotta keep our heads about us and think ahead and not think of the next cute viral video challenge.
Yeah. If we could just end with any final advice you have for parents regarding our decisions related to our kids and social media.
Yeah. Well, I think I would kind of talk about another downer type of issue, and that is the issue of sexual assault in ride hail cases, Uber and Lyft. Another situation where we went from having taxis and the people in the taxis going through a significant process and getting fingerprinted and serious background checks. Unfortunately, it can be very dangerous, particularly if your children are of an age where they are drinking and they're going out late at night. It is dangerous to be alone, particularly if you're a woman. It is dangerous to be alone if you're intoxicated. It's dangerous to pass out in the backseat of a stranger's car. So I would tell parents that they should talk to their kids about not riding alone.
So, Mike, is there anything else on the Maynard family that you want to share, or that case, or anything else that we didn't cover related to the legal aspects of this issue?
Like you say, that litigation and lobbying, the one thing I do and the one thing that you do, has similarities in that we're both advocates for people. And it's important that there is a source of information. It is important that you vet that source of information. We all know of kind of crazy stuff that's on the internet that we shouldn't rely on. You gotta check your sources and consider your sources. But we're in a society that's different in many respects, but is the same in a lot of respects, in that there's good people and there's bad people. And
Hmm.
the bad people have more access to you than they used to.
Yep.
It used to be just geographical. And now people can get stalked from a different country. It's so important what kids put out there. You got to have these conversations. Don't be posting pictures that you don't want everyone to see, because really hard to get rid of them, and really traumatic when someone tries to use them against you. So
Hmm.
I think what I'd end with is, now more than ever, you need to educate yourself on what you need to do to talk to your kids about. There's a lot of different ways that didn't exist when we were kids,
Hmm.
where they can get depressed or addicted or kidnapped or assaulted. I mean, just it's just scary. But if you're educating them and they keep their wits about them and they
Hmm.
plan things in advance, then there are things out there where with the tech where it can help. And we're doing our jobs to try and help keep people safe.
Yeah.
So keep at it. Keep your eyes and ears open. Keep digging for more information, and tell your kids to put down the phone and listen, because you got to tell them some important stuff.
Yeah, and those conversations can be uncomfortable. They can be hard. Nobody wants to talk to their kid about pornography at 7 years old, but unfortunately, that's often
Right.
when kids are seeing pornography online. So you
Right.
hit the nail on the head with having open, early conversations so that when your kid is faced with these things that they will be, they know how to handle it and how to
How to get
react.
help, how
Yeah.
to get support. Absolutely.
Mm.
Yeah, it was very eye opening. I have three teenagers now, but when
Hmm.
when they were young, like the stuff that they were taught in school, I was like, wow. Like, I'm glad they're being taught this, but still, wow.
Yeah.
And they have to hear it from you.
Yeah.
They got to get reinforcement of those messages. They got to hear them from people they trust and that they know care about them. So we can't just rely on schools. We have to kind of tell them over and over and over, hey, I love you. That's why I'm telling you this stuff.
Hmm.
You gotta listen on it.
Yeah, and if they don't listen to you, if you don't tell them, they're going to learn about a lot of that stuff from social media. And we do not want social media teaching our children about any of these things.
It is a different world. I
Hmm.
grew up without influencers and all that means. So yeah, it is. It's be careful and
Hmm.
try and help them be aware of the negative things they could get themselves into.
Yeah. So I cover a lot of these topics that you need to educate your kids on the podcast. So just, I would recommend parents just go to scrollingtodeath.com, browse through the different topics, the different stories, the different experts like Mike, and learn about each individual topic so that you know how to approach it with your kid. And I think too, if your kid is a teenager, they're old enough to hear some of these stories, this interview, other interviews that where other teenagers have been affected, so that they know exactly how this kind of stuff goes down. So
Yeah, I mean, it depends on how mature your kid is,
yes, true. Yeah.
right? But I will sometimes read the medical records, or I will occasionally show a picture.
Hmm.
And man, I hope that scares them
Hmm.
straight, and in a way that teenagers need to be scared sometimes. Like, hey, this is really a life or death situation, unfortunately.
It is scrolling to death, right?
Hopefully, no. Hopefully,
Yeah, hopefully no. Okay, Mike, thank you so much for the work that you do to support families. It's so important. And you're helping to protect children like mine from being harmed in the future. And so I'm really grateful to you and your firm and your team for all the work you do. So thank you for having this conversation.
thank you. I appreciate your time.
Sure.